Hey guys, so the Rekon 5 has been pretty much the most successful product we have in the Rekon store, and it's also still my personal favorite. This thing actually isn't fully up to date yet, it's an earlier version, it's still got the motors that aren't color matched, and we moved this foldable antenna mount to the rear because it interfered with some cameras. There's also a little evolution to the frame with an extra screw secure in the arms, but basically it's still the same thing. And for me, it's still my favorite because this light 5-inch platform with its 2004 motors is just so incredibly versatile. You can basically throw any battery at it and it will work. I'm mostly using it on 1300 milliamp hour 6S batteries. Gives me something like 10 minutes of freestyle and 12, 13, sometimes 14 minutes of long range cruising, which is enough for most long range missions, and it's got plenty of power on 6S. If I really need to go far, I go for lithium ions. It's great to have the 6S motors on a 4S lithium ion because it limits the amp draw, so you're not overstressing the cells, that they can only deliver something like 30 amps, and then it's a perfect platform that does over 20 minutes of long range cruising. So this is why it's still my favorite. It can do anything, it can freestyle, it can do long range, it can do some cinematic shots with a naked GoPro. This is more or less my go-to quad that I take with me everywhere I'm going on vacation or doing stuff outdoors or for long range flying in the mountains. This is my go-to quad. So what I want to do today is check out the competition because I saw this Diatone Roma L5, which is basically the exact same concept, and I actually think it looks quite good. So let's check it out. Let's see if it does anything better or differently. That would be interesting. All right, now let's dive into the overall specs. You'll see a few differences. Basically, interestingly, the weight is the same. Pretty much the Rekon 5 is 234, and I think the Roma is 236. Yeah, so plus minus 2 grams. They are pretty much the exact weight, same weight. Okay, the Rekon still got the GoPro mount here, so it's actually a little bit lighter, but I would say it's in a range where it doesn't really matter much. Now, both have the Vista unit, both have the long range antenna, both have 2004 motors. The Rekon's got slightly higher kV, so it does have a little bit more power. It's got 1800 kV, while the Diatone has 1700 kV. We have a F7 on both. On the Diatone, this is an all-in-one flight controller, so it's all on one board. I think the only downside actually of having everything on one board is that it's a bit harder to isolate this from vibration because you always have the motor and battery wires going there, so I feel like these are slightly harder to tune. I don't know if that's subjective, if I'm completely right here, but my feeling is that they are a bit harder to tune because it's just one board and it's difficult to isolate the flight controller wire. If you have two boards, the flight controller is completely separate here. There's no motor wires going on there, no battery wires, so this thing can be isolated from vibration more easily. I don't really think it's much of a disadvantage that if something breaks here, the entire board is broken, because usually, I mean, what happened to me most of the time if a board breaks is that an ESC goes up on fire. And if that happens, honestly, in both cases, everything, you can throw away basically everything, because if the ESC on here fails and starts to burn, it also kills the flight controller. So in theory, sure, it's a disadvantage to have everything on one board. In practice, in terms of reliability, in practice, it's not really. Never had much of an issue with that. The only downside I see is actually that, yes, the isolation from vibration is a bit worse if you have an all-in-one, basically. Then the camera on the Vista is the same. This is the Nebula Pro. Now, I know the Nebula Pros are just completely out of stock, difficult to get, it's basically impossible, so we actually have to, although we don't want to, have to deliver some of the Rekon 5s with the Nebula Nano. There's just no other thing we can do on those DJI cameras at the moment. Hope the situation will get better, but at the moment there's just nothing we can do to change that, and I guess Diatone will do the same. I got this one a while ago, so this is probably why it still has a Nebula Pro. Then we have both have a buzzer, so the Diatone's got a small buzzer up here. Now the main disadvantage is that this buzzer doesn't have an independent battery, like here on the Rekon. And I think this is pretty important. This one's got its own little battery. So if you crash and your battery disconnects, which happens quite often, this one will still work. While if you don't have that in here, well, it's just going to be silent and basically impossible to find. So a bit more security with the extra battery. I think they went for a beeper without battery because they just didn't have the space. It's super tight in here. As you can see, they even had to remove some of the, so this moves quite a lot because it's just mounted on a small piece of, it's actually difficult to get this on video. Let me zoom in. The GPS mount is really mounted here only with a very, very thin piece of TPU here because they actually had to make space for that buzzer. So space is super tight. And I think they just didn't want to fit one with an extra battery in here because of space. Honestly, I just went for mounting it here on the bottom plate. It's maybe not super elegant to have this thing, you know, sticking out here, but I think it's super important to have this battery. You know, what is good if it's slightly more elegant to have the beeper integrated into the frame and then just lose the entire quad because it doesn't beep anymore because your battery ripped off in the crash. So I really prefer having this separate battery here on the quad. Now, if we look at how the receiver antennas are mounted, so you have a mount for crossfire here in the rear. So it's really the classic mount, having it basically horizontally in the rear, or you can use regular 2.4 gigahertz antennas, something like a FreeSky. I have a FreeSky RXSR in here, which I really wouldn't recommend because this is made to fly long range, and this thing just has absolutely poor range. So this is pretty much useless. You're gonna need something like Crossfire, for example, that to really make sense of one of those quads. What we have on the Rekon here is basically the foldable antenna, which now is in the rear on the production model. Mine is still in front, but the idea here is that, so one issue I have with Crossfire on long range flights is as soon as the antenna is basically pointing towards you like this, I get fail safes. Sometimes even as close as 2 or 3 kilometers away, I get fail safes when the antenna points towards me, just for a brief second. But the quad is gone for 1 or 2 seconds, and then you know, it goes into fail-safe mode, into return to home, and then I can catch it again, but it's gone for a second if I don't, if the antenna is pointed towards me. Obviously, this can happen if your antenna is here sort of horizontally. If your quad is basically flying like this, sideways, you will have this issue. But if you have the antenna vertically, no problem. No matter how the quad, unless you're really under the quad, which then means you're not going to be very far away because you're not flying like kilometers high, this will always be perfectly oriented. And it just folds for the sake of, you know, this is just annoying if you want to store it in a backpack, so it just folds. It will stress this wire slightly, but honestly, this one is really a few months old and it's still absolutely fine. So maybe after something like a year or two, this could start to break. Then you'll need a new antenna that costs something like $7. But so far, no problem at all, and I've been using this for a very long time here. Okay, let's briefly talk about the motors. So these are still the purple ones. They are now red, matching the rest of the quad. So 2004 motors. These are also still HDRC branded. We have the Rekon branded ones now on the production model, but basically very high quality from pretty much the best motor supplier. Very high quality motors here. 1800 kV on the Rekon 5. So smooth and geared towards efficiency. And on the Diatone, we have the Mamba Toka. So same size, slightly lower kV. And I have to say, these look really nice. This sort of emerald green and gold, absolutely beautiful motors. They do behave quite similarly. They have a little bit less power than the Rekon ones, probably because the kV is just a little bit lower. But very nicely done, the motors here. I think an opportunity they actually missed, and that's maybe a small criticism I would have, but it's really complaining on a very high level, is the overall finish of the product is actually quite nice. The frame is very nice, the details, the motors are nice, but it doesn't perfectly match. And I feel like this part here, this sort of yellowish plastic, just doesn't really fit the rest. This would be way nice if this was just black injection molded plastic. And why didn't they anodize these braces here in the front in the same green as the motors, or in gold? That would just look so nice. It's just a bit of, yeah, matches the Vista now, but it's a bit of a missed opportunity to sort of get the real, design and aesthetic finish perfectly by having this a bit nicer color match. I think maybe they tried to match the gold of the motors here with the plastic, but this just looks like this looks like old yellowish plastic now. So I don't know, not super perfect. That's really complaining on a very, very high level in that case here. All right, so maybe let's talk about last but not least, let's talk about the frames and how they compare. All right, first difference we'll notice when we look at the frames is that the Diatone is actually much longer. So it's considerably these are pretty much aligned here in the front. And as you can see, it's like 2.5 centimeters longer easily. So a bit longer frame is not necessarily a disadvantage. Aerodynamically, it's of course worse. The upside is you have a bit more space for batteries, so that's not too bad. You'll have a slight advantage if you're carrying a full-size GoPro and a big battery, which will overload the quads. I think it's not too much of an advantage. So, for example, carrying a full GoPro Hero 8 and a 3000 milliamp hour battery, that's a lot of load on this quad. It's much nicer with a naked GoPro, but this will be easier on this one. The downside, obviously, I mean, it's got a bigger profile when you're flying slightly, at the same angle. It's just slightly bigger, so you have slightly more air resistance. Now, looking at the frame construction, so there's this basically there's one issue you need to solve, and they're both dead cat designs. There's one issue you need to solve with these dead cat designs, is that if you crash like this, you will hit the front of the frame because the arms are just moved back. How I solve this is with this TPU part here in the front that will just, you will hit the TPU first. This will bend and then you'll hit some carbon and you should be fine. How Diatone solved this is with an aluminum front. That's also a way to do it. I mean, the disadvantage is that this will, if you hit it lightly, it will first bend and scratch, while the TPU will be fine on light crashes. On a heavy crash, probably on the Rekon, you will, if you really crash this heavy to the front, you will probably damage this carbon part here and have to replace it. But on light crashes, you will be fine and not see anything, which just the TPU will basically get all the impact, and TPU really doesn't break or damage very easily. While on this one, if you have a light impact, you will, scratch your aluminum here, and if you have a heavy impact, you'll have to replace those here. So I guess it's just different ways to solve that problem. Now the frame itself on the Diatone, it looks kind of, it doesn't look like a very regular frame because it's so slim and long, but actually the construction is very conservative. So it's a split deck design. As you can see, we have a split bottom plate. The advantage is that basically you have more room in the front here for the camera. You have a bit less room here, so it nicely fits the Vista, and this whole thing is actually pretty tight. So as you can see, there's not much room here on top of the Vista. Basically, there's just the wires running through here, and this is already taken up, so everything is quite tight in here. That's probably also why they're going for an all-in-one. So if you want to build this frame with anything else than an all-in-one, you will probably get into a bit of trouble because there's not a lot of room. While here on the Rekon, this is more comfortable. Now, again, the frame is a pretty classic construction here with the split deck. The arms are slightly different than usual. So what they did is actually what I wanted to avoid is have a mix of M2 and M3 screws. So as you can see here, I have M3 screws, one in the middle, two here, and this is M2. And the M2 is probably going into a standoff. Yes, it is. So you have something with a lot of screws basically and press nuts and so on. That's what I wanted to avoid, this sort of mix. And by the way, the front arms are one piece as far as I can tell here. So one M3, two M2 screws. This really, I mean, it works fine. It's not a problem. I've just thought that it's actually cleaner to just have these two here. And that's all there is here. No M2, M3 mix and so on. You just have these M2s basically mounting the frame and the standoffs. And then you have the bicycle bolts here, the aluminum bolts holding the arms. Then we're sort of, it's more aesthetic than anything else, but it just simplifies the overall construction. So anyway, absolutely fine how Diatone solved the frame design. I don't see much of an issue. I don't know if it's really a good idea to have the front arms in one piece, because if you break one of them, and probably you will not break a rear arm. If you crash, most of the time you'll break a front arm. Then you'll have to replace basically the entire thing here. You'll have to unscrew this motor too. It's a bit more annoying. I think it wouldn't have been much of an issue to have these separate here, but well, it's not a huge deal, I guess, since this is not a racing quad that you'll crash all the time. So one thing I'll have to address is the GPS actually on the Diatone. Now, Diatone seems to have done a lot to make the GPS reception better. So as you can see below the GPS, there is some copper to isolate it. I don't think this is visible. It's visible here. So as you can see, the wires going to the GPS are wrapped in this sort of mesh here. This is isolating them from any noise. Because the problem is the Vista here. The Vista likes to disturb your GPS a lot. But nevertheless, although they wrap the wires here, they have the copper here, the GPS doesn't work on this one. I have no idea what is going on. It just doesn't catch any satellites. Really doesn't. All day I tried this, 0 satellites, nothing. I don't know if I have a bad GPS or if anything is wrong here, but it just doesn't work. On the Rekon, honestly, we didn't do all these things. The GPS is not isolated in any specific way. The wires are just running in the bottom here. It doesn't have an issue. GPS works absolutely fine. This one here, they did a lot to make it work better. It doesn't work, so I have no idea what's going on. Maybe it's just a bad GPS. That's absolutely possible. Now, flight performance. Flight performance actually is very, very similar between these two here. Slightly more power on the Rekon because it's got slightly higher kV motors, but overall, I mean, it's the same props, it's the same stator size, it's pretty much the exact same weight. It is basically the same specification. I think the Rekon 5 out of the box does have a slightly nicer tune. HDLRC, which did the tuning, actually did a pretty good job at tuning the Rekon 5. It works very well, slightly better than the Diatone in my opinion. But again, here not a huge difference, if I'm honest. It's just a little bit nicer, I think. Yeah, but overall, I mean, as you can see, this I'm freestyling this here. This is something you can do with it. You can long range cruise, and again, this is for me. If I had to choose one quad and only one that I can own for the rest of my life, it would be exactly this type of quad because it's able to do anything. I mean, it's not perfect at anything, so. The 4-inch micro long ranges fly longer on the same battery. A real freestyle quad obviously freestyles better, but it can just do anything, and it does it actually pretty well. It's like 80% of the performance is there. So for me, this is really a very, very nice platform. All right, now to conclude on this, and I mean, obviously this isn't much of a surprise, but for me the Rekon 5 is still the better choice because it's got the buzzer with the independent battery. It's got details like the folding antenna. This is actually, I mean, it seems small, but for real long range flying, this is a pretty big deal to have your antenna vertically. I think the tune is slightly better. It might also be because it doesn't have an all-in-one and it's easier to isolate the flight controller from vibration. So small things like this. Also that the kV is slightly higher on the motors. It works slightly better on a 4S lithium ion. Has a bit less wobbles on a lithium ion because the kV is a bit higher. So for me, this one still works slightly better, but obviously you don't have to believe me. I'm clearly biased towards my own product, but actually the Diatone is a very decent product, and I guess you will be absolutely happy if you buy this one. I'll put some affiliate links for the Diatone in the video description. Obviously, if you buy it through there, actually, I get a small commission from Banggood, and it helps me out even if you do not choose the Rekon 5, but the Diatone instead. So choose whichever you prefer, as long as you use my affiliate link. And if you do, thanks for supporting. Alright guys, hope you found this interesting, and yeah, see you soon. Bye bye.